Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone, wherever you are in the world. My name is Christian Bugge Henriksen, and as the coordinator of the FoodSHIFT 2030 project, Horizon 2020 project, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this FoodSHIFT webinar on shaking up the food system. This session is officially affiliated with Eat at Home, and through that, the process towards the UN Food System Summit. Today, we're going to hear from a range of citizen-driven innovations across Europe that are contributing to shifting the way we produce and consume food. And I'm happy to now hand over the word to Stephanie Kennedy from our FoodSHIFT 2030 project partner, Sustain, who will be chairing this webinar. Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Christian, and hello, everybody. And can I just echo his welcome? Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers from across the FoodSHIFT family, and we're also excited to hear from you today as we're hoping to have an exciting discussion at the end of our presentations. So here's just a quick reminder of what's to come over the next hour. We have a welcome and introduction. This is this moment now. We've heard from Christian, the project coordinator of FoodSHIFT. I'm Stephanie Kennedy from Sustain, which is a FoodSHIFT network partner. We're going to hear first from Dirk Washer. He's the innovation manager at FoodSHIFT, and he's going to be, first of all, tackling this question head on. What exactly does this citizen-driven innovation mean, and what does it look like? Following that, we'll be going to several experiences from across Europe. We'll start in Berlin with Christine Pohl from the Berlin Food Policy Council. We'll then be going to Puglia, and there we'll be hearing from Maria Selenia and Roberto Palladini from the community Compost. And then finally, we'll be back up north again to Copenhagen and hearing from Emily Norford from EAT. Emily will also be talking about EAT generally, but also EAT's role with our Copenhagen FoodSHIFT Lab. And after that, we will go on to our panel discussion. So lots of great stuff coming up. A few housekeeping rules, just to let you know, we are recording this webinar, and the recording of this webinar will then be available on the FoodSHIFT website. Please take to Twitter to let people know you're listening, you're tuning in, you're watching. I've got the Twitter handles up there. You can also add in the EAT Forum handle and the EAT Forum's hashtag #FoodCanFixIt. Two ways for you to get in touch with us during the webinar today. We have our Q&A section. This is to ask speakers direct questions. So after hearing a presentation, if you would like to find out a bit more, or maybe you have a comment, please go to the Q&A section at the bottom to field those questions. And our panelists will be monitoring that Q&A box and hoping to get back to you as the questions come in. And then we will use our chat for more the general technical issues. So if you're having a problem with sound, with image, or just have a very general question about the webinar, please use that function. And our lovely Regine will be answering your questions in the chat box. So first of all, I thought I might quickly just say what FoodSHIFT is all about. It's great to have so many of you here, but I understand that maybe not all of you really understand what FoodSHIFT 2030 is. Essentially, we're a project empowering citizens to shift the European food system to a low carbon, circular and plant-based future. So no small feat. It's funded under the EU Horizon 2020 research programme, and the coordinator is Christian Berg Henriksen, who we've all heard from at the beginning. There's his email. Please do get in touch if you'd like to find out more. There are 9 city regions currently involved in the FoodSHIFT project, and we call them accelerator labs. So if you hear us saying lab, what we're talking really about is a city region, one of them across Europe, and they're made up of several stakeholders from all walks of life, as you can see. And then each of those different city regions has a defined innovation focus. And it's this innovation focus that we're looking at today. But key to that innovation as we're tackling the food system, trying to really shake things up, is citizen power or people power. But the first question we want to know is, what does this citizen-driven innovation actually look like? It's what FoodSHIFT is all about. So to start us off, I'm going to hand it over to Dirk. Dirk, over to you. Tell us, what is this innovation looking like?
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, for handing over, and welcome and hello to everyone out there. Actually, this presentation is, let me see, I'm gonna work on, I need to move on. I requested the control.
It's working? It's working there?
Let me see, not yet. Please go back.
It is on my screen. I'm not moving.
It's going backwards. I see. It's all right. Just briefly, this is a presentation prepared by my colleague and partner from ILRO, Martin Krivich, and myself. And I'm just addressing the type of citizen-driven innovation which we consider to be relevant here. First, I'd like to show some brief images, because I think lots about the food system is about images, and many associations go into the direction shown in these pictures. Citizen urban gardens, and indeed a close affinity between the citizen-driven dimension and the urban agriculture is probably in many people's minds. That's correct, but I think the scope is wider, and that's a little bit the type of message which I'm trying to build here. Let me see whether it's moving ahead. It's not moving ahead now. It's kind of...
Okay, I'll move it for you, Dirk. Next
yeah,
one.
thanks. Please do so. All right, yes, but the figures to go with it, with these images. This is an example from Rotterdam city, and it shows a type of urban and city agricultural activities. There's neighborhood gardens, educational gardens, children farms, city farms, all kinds of these little colorful dots. And if you go to the next one, you see the figures which go with it. This is about 105, probably some more meanwhile, which initiatives which add up to 31 hectares in total, which then are again capable of providing 0.05% of the food needed by the 600,000 citizens of this part of central Rotterdam. Next one. So the ambition is clearly higher. We just heard it from Stephanie before. Citizen-driven food systems are considered as a model, or as models for democracy of space, people, and knowledge, ensuring transparency and control over food security, safety, and quality. And in principle, this is about revolutionizing the agro-industrial paradigm with the goal of establishing bottom-up self-support systems, food systems, with cities at their very center. So that's the ambition, and that goes, I think, in the scope clearly further than some of the examples which maybe immediately jump to one's mind. Next one. So there is a notion of, let's say, impact and let's say efficiency in what can citizen-driven food system reach actually. And some of the classical, and maybe also meanwhile old-fashioned views are that families are at the very bottom of it, but more passively in distance to those making the decisions, which are then in the work world, SMEs, higher up the medium-large business, and then maybe in the key function are the so-called in-crowd, called here influencers, inventors, and investors, who somehow are at the trigger of the decision-making. But that image is not right, and the distance is clearly not as far as we might think, or some people might think. So we do see different types of, let's say, approaches and perspectives here. the citizen initiatives as we know them, for example, setting a local food chain up, an example of Herenboeren, where farmers are basically cooperating with urban dwellers to really manage the land, or citizen co-creating food landscapes, like in the next one, like in the example from the town of Stenen, which is a map here, part of the Belgium Oostende contribution. Citizens asking for action from government. This is often groups, networks, which basically push the government for more innovative approaches to food. And then, of course, citizens reflecting and sharing, like in citizen science, with information education and in various outlets. On the other hand, there's citizen choices as consumers, as co-managers of food systems, and also as democratic agents, basically making decisions on what happens with the wasted food or which choices to make when buying. And citizen support, which is another one, cooperating with technology, with other actors in the food system, like building, for example, household devices for proper waste management, or decision support apps, next picture, which can show and interact directly when consuming or when making decisions as informed citizens. Next one, please. Yeah, next one, please. So that means that actually this triangle looks quite different. We see the citizen change, the citizens as change maker, consisting of consumers, producers, and stakeholders of the network, and they drive both policy and business change. And this, again, the policy themselves are necessitating changes in business. And business, again, is affecting the policy and the market change and enabling citizens to change again. So this is a very dense, interactive, multiple interactive construction where citizens are not acting themselves alone, but having many effects at many levels of the food system. And I think this is one of the key messages which we see, and where also the acceleration labs of FoodSHIFT come into place. The World Bank, in their approach, was actually pointing lots of ambitions at the living labs of being the engine of change in the cities. They had developed an innovation, let's say citizen-driven innovation approach where the living labs stand central. And next one, in an old way, that these living labs had been considered of being just kind of ad hoc temporal events, which are occasional experiments of, let's say, of new service innovation and have a certain marginal quality. But the future and the situation of an ongoing, let's say, negative impact of the traditional industry and of climate change activities has prompted living labs to really play a different role of basically consistently providing co-design opportunities, an institutionalization of citizen involvement, then business offering innovation in cooperation, for example, open innovation devices, and where spatial planning at the city and governmental living level and ICT plays really an important constant role. So living labs are not something which are only happening in one afternoon on a sunny day in the month, but which is considered to be an ongoing process of transition in the food system. And showing that scope, I think it makes quite a difference from just thinking about an important aspect of urban gardening, but taking into account the many colors and opportunities which are there for citizen-driven change to really make a difference. So that's a brief look at that type and scope, and I would like to hand over and back to Stephanie.
Wonderful, thank you, Dirk, for that. And sorry for any of those PowerPoint issues there, but that was great. So we're going to move on now to our first speaker from one of the many examples of how FoodSHIFT is currently involved across Europe, working alongside local partners. So Christine Pohl is the coordinator of the Berlin Food Policy Council, and it is my absolute pleasure to hand it over to you, Christine.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I just requested control.
Let's see, there we go.
Okay.
We got that.
So we should move to the next slide, and I don't actually see that working, so maybe I'll just give control back to you and tell you when to click.
Let me see.
Okay, maybe just move to the next slide. Right. So why did we establish a food policy council in Berlin is the big question. The answer is on the screen because our food system is at a dead end. 10 years ago, I was working for different NGOs on global food and agriculture, on trade and corporate accountability. And I was really fed up, and I still am really fed up, that we are living off a food system that exploits people and destroys the planet. And also that we can have cheap food in big cities and mainly in the north, like in Berlin. So that led me to think that instead of only working at the international level, actually what we really need to do is also focus on the local level and make sure that our local food systems don't rely on this damaging global system anymore, so that we actually can change the whole system from the bottom up. Luckily, I wasn't the only one in Berlin thinking that way. And back in 2013 and 2014, we started to talk about how to shake up the food system, our local food system. And so the idea of food policy councils very soon came up. We looked at the examples of the US, of Canada, of the UK, where they had already developed since the 1980s. And so next slide, please. In 2015, we had the first network meeting, and I'm not showing pictures and photos because actually all our pictures would be of people sitting around a table somewhere. So this is more to illustrate what we are doing. So we had network meetings where we just came together and discussed how to shape the food system. We invited for a first meeting people from different areas of the food system in and around Berlin, so producers and urban gardeners and food manufacturers, distributors, activists, so everybody. We talked about the idea of a food policy council for Berlin and very quickly agreed that we really do need a food policy council, and then started moving and discussing more. So in the beginning, we really had, or we always have, lots of meetings and discussions. We started out to define what our vision is of the future food system that we want to achieve and how we organize ourselves around that, how to get policymakers to adopt this vision and to create a helpful policy environment so that we can actually achieve these goals. And I think one of the main differences of the Food Policy Council in Berlin and of many food policy councils in the German-speaking area is compared to the British or the US food policy councils is that we are civil society initiatives. So we are actually citizens coming together and demanding change. So we see our role as a platform that brings together the different players in the local food system and help them to develop positions and policy proposals, but also common projects. So we're not part of the city administration, but we are a completely independent organization. Our structure is that we have an open assembly twice a year. Everybody can join. There's no formal membership, and the assembly agrees on the general direction of the Food Policy Council. And the assembly also elects a speakers council every 2 years. So the speakers represent the Food Policy Council. They steer the process of developing our positions, and they can also initiate projects. We have different working groups that are open for everybody as well, and they usually form around specific projects. So what have we achieved? So maybe the next slide, please. So right from the beginning, we pressured policymakers for a food strategy for Berlin, because Berlin has 3.5 million people, more by now, but it didn't actually have a strategy on how to feed everybody with good food or with any food, so they just didn't have a strategy. We succeeded to put food on the agenda of Berlin policymakers. In 2016, there were local elections, and in advance of that, we asked all parties on their plans for the food system. In the end, a green center-left coalition took office, and we achieved to be named in the coalition agreement. So you can see that in the bottom left. In the coalition agreement, they committed themselves to develop a sustainable local food strategy together with the Food Policy Council. So for this process of developing a strategy, we developed a set of policy proposals and demands and fed them into this process. This is the paper, the Catalogue of Demands, that you can see on the right. That is the basically the title and the cover. This is the silhouette or the outline of Berlin that you can see there. Most people probably don't know it. So we did, in this process, we did criticize the whole process a lot at the same time, because it wasn't, in our view, not transparent enough to the public what's being developed and by whom. There was a general lack of participation for the public, and we also criticized the outcome of this whole process, because in our view, the outcome was not actually a food strategy, because the paper that came out of it didn't have an actual vision. It lacked goals, and it didn't have a roadmap with actual steps to achieve this vision. So a strategy should be more than that. So what the Senate in the end presented is more of an action plan with a description of different fields and actions to be taken without a coherent vision. So you see, we do criticize a lot, but that is also what we see as our role. We want to nag, we want to push policymakers further and yeah, be uncomfortable. So we are a pressure group, and we continue to pressure for a better food system. And we do see that this action plan that came out is a first step that includes some good actions, including some which we have also proposed, but there's still a long way to go if we want to achieve a climate just and a socially just food system. So next slide, please. So what we are doing is what we're generally doing. We bring people together and make plans. We don't normally stand on a piece of bread, but we get together and discuss, for example, in our regular assemblies, but also in specific events. For example, this coming weekend, we actually have a big action conference coming up where we bring together activists from the food transition movement, but also together with climate activists and the social justice movements. And we want to bring everybody together at the table, or online rather, in this case, for a climate just food system transformation by 2030 for Berlin. And we want to develop solutions that make our regional food system fit for the future. Next slide. And part of the solutions that we're proposing are, for example, decentralized food hubs, which we want to bring to all districts of Berlin. This is also the big focus of the Berlin Lab within the FoodSHIFT project that Stephanie told you about. We call these food hubs Lebensmittelpunkte. You can see it written at the right-hand side. It's a German, it's actually a nice word game, including the words food and also center of life. So it's actually a really nice word in German. So to us, they're open spaces. You can imagine them a bit like the image, where local food can be sold and distributed, where produce can be processed. So for example, apples made into juice or jam production, or well, where people can learn skills around food and they can just come together, cook together, and where everybody from a neighborhood can converge and come together to eat and meet other people and exchange and form a neighborhood. So to us, they are focal points for the food system transformation that we need, and they bring people together, they reduce the climate impacts by shortening food supply chains, and they make good food accessible for everyone in the neighborhood. Next slide. So I'm sure that all sounds fantastic, and it is actually really cool, because I think local food policy councils are a great idea to bring people together in an area to address the specific problems and challenges in that area. So every food policy council is different and should be different, because every region is different. So food policy councils can adapt to the local situation, and the influence is more direct. So I would say to everyone, if there is a food policy council where you live, go and join, see what you can do. If there's no food policy council, go establish one, do it yourself. It's not that hard, but there are also, of course, some challenges. For example, as a civil society organization, we are constantly underfunded, and as a loose movement, we're very open to everyone, but it's also a challenge to keep people together and engaged. And I think there's always the general big question that should be, that everyone who's starting movement should ask themselves, is how to get more people overall engaged, and especially people from all backgrounds, because we can only achieve the food system transformation we need if really everyone is part of it and we're taking everybody along. COVID-19 hasn't made that easier. Online meetings are just not the same to meet people and to get them on board. But on the other hand, COVID-19 has also made people more aware of how fragile our food systems are. So in Germany, we've had major outbreaks in slaughterhouses, or the problem of harvest rotting on the fields because the migrant labor wasn't allowed across the border. So the need for alternatives has also risen on the agenda. And I think now there's a chance to make everything better. And I think we should just go on and take that chance. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christine. Challenge accepted. Wonderful presentation and really inspiring stories coming out from Berlin. Remember, we have a panel discussion later to delve into that. So if you have any questions about that, either direct them via the Q&A section, or we'll discuss it at the end. So now moving on to another example, we're going to the south of Italy now, to a region called Puglia, the heel of the boot, as they call it. And we're going to hear more about the community compost. This is connected to the Bari FoodSHIFT Lab. So this Bari Lab are working alongside this group and believe they really have some innovative ideas, which is why they are with us here today. So over to you, Maria, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. I just tried the remote control. Okay.
Now you have it. Yeah.
Great. So hello, everybody. I'm Selenia from the Innovation Cooperative in south of Italy. I will talk today about compost community. So why are we talking about compost community? Because our goal is to create plans where the citizen is the protagonist. We developed a sustainable management system for organic waste through an innovative model that integrates community composting and earthworm cultivation. The model is the result of an intense co-design activity with users like public administration, waste companies, citizens, and companies that produce waste. So, how was developed the Compost Community Project? A prototype of a management platform was created to facilitate collaboration and interaction between users, also in a distributed, asynchronous, and multi-client mode. Creating a solution that guarantees constant dialogue between public administration, citizen, plant, and waste company. How it works? Household organic waste and small pruning cuttings are placed in an electromechanical composter. After an aerobic process of 60 days, the semi-processed product obtained is transferred to the earthworm tank for maturation. After about 30 days in the earthworm cultivation, we obtain humus, an organic soil improver with a high value in agriculture. Our plant capacity does not exceed 300 tons per year. Okay. The management model for earthworm plants was developed with the adoption of the Living Lab approach. A shared and co-design management model of composters was created with the aim of standardizing their management, optimizing the compost sales chain, and the management cost for the organic fraction, which is the higher by weight, 34% among all commodity categories for municipal solid waste. This was possible defining the model of interaction between the various actors involved, prototyping and customizing the solutions, tasting and experimenting technology that meet actual needs of the final user, demonstrating and presenting in public demo lab the prototyping solution developed, also in order to make them usable by further communities or interested users. Analyzing the economic exploitation of the results obtained from the experimentation. So, worm composting is a sustainable management system for organic waste, and we have introduced an innovative model that integrates community composting and earthworm cultivation. The two combined solutions have exponentially increased the capacity of the composting plant. And the first trial was recently completed in Melpignano, in south of Italy, with excellent results, with an increase in waste management in tandem with a reduction of investment cost. Okay. Why is it convenient economically? An earthworm composting plant allows to reduce the reduction of urban waste up to 40% with a significant advantage on collection, transport, and disposal cost, while also saving money on the waste tax. Processing the organic fraction contributes to environmental sustainability. In fact, organic waste does not end up in landfills, but it is transformed into humus that can be sold as fertilizer. The high quality, the earthworm composting plant transforms organic waste into compost in about 90 days. In the first 15 days, it decomposes in an odorless way, and for the remaining day, the semi-finished product is passed to an earthworm tanks to improve its quality. And the solution is designed for public and private structures. Municipal bodies, farms, citizens, and environmental hygiene companies can obtain an economic advantage from the plant, because it becomes the hub of virtuous activities in a community. Employment, awareness, and the involvement of the citizen for the proper waste management becoming an advantage for the entire civil community. The earthworm composting plant contributes to achieve the sustainable development and circular economy objective. The design, production, and the distribution phases play an important role in favoring reuse, recycling, regeneration of the end-of-life phase of a product. Last but not least, worm composting adopts the priority scales in terms of sustainability in waste recovery, necessary for the transition to a European Green Deal. Less use of resources, little water, little electricity, circular use of materials, products and services, and the prevention of waste production. Furthermore, we invite you to visit our plant, and we are a part of a company network called the Puglia Eco Travel that organizes ecological and seasonal tour with local food and seasonal food. And our plant is one of the stages of the journey. So thank you all, and Roberto will answer to all the detail by chat. In the technical issue chat. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Great. Moving on. Fantastic. Thank you. And so now we're going to move, last but certainly not least, on to Emily. Emily is here representing EAT within, an EAT forum within which this side session is taking place, but also EAT undercarried a very interesting project with a FoodSHIFT Lab in Copenhagen. So this is an opportunity to hear a bit more about how that collaboration worked and about EAT generally. Emily, thank you for being with us, and over to you.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. I think I took control of the screen, but let's...
You have control, you have it, yeah.
Great, so I'll speak a little bit about a project that EAT is involved with that's not officially part of the FoodSHIFT Copenhagen Lab, but that has a lot of similarities and complementarities. And then at the end of my presentation, I will describe kind of how the two can fit together and our plans moving forward. But first, I'll give a very brief introduction to EAT. EAT, in case any of you aren't so familiar with it, is a global nonprofit based in Oslo, Norway, working to transform the global food system in collaboration with science, business, policy, and civil society, and also working across the health and sustainability angles, so taking a really holistic approach to food systems transformation. In January 2019, we launched a report of the Eat Lancet Commission on Food Planet Health. This report is the result of several years of collaboration with 30-something scientific experts across the world, and it's setting kind of the first officially defined targets for a healthy diet from a sustainable food production system. So the little plate diagram that you see on the slide here is what we refer to as the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet, or the Eat Lancet plate. And it's showing that in order to have the nutrients that we need, but also doing this in a way that can be sustainable and within planetary boundaries, this is generally what you want the plate to look like. So 50% fruits and vegetables, and then smaller percentages of some other items. And this Eat Lancet plate is something that's become the scientific underpinning of our work. So I will refer to it a little bit throughout the rest of the presentation. So I mentioned that I won't focus specifically on the FoodSHIFT Copenhagen Lab, but rather a project that EAT's involved with that has a lot of linkages with the Copenhagen Lab. And this project is called Shifting Urban Diets. It involves a focus on Copenhagen, so geographically quite aligned with the lab, and also has some of the same project partners that are involved. Shifting Urban Diets is a 3-year initiative working to translate the Eat Lancet science to the city level. We're really hoping that this project can help make healthy and sustainable food the default for people living in cities. And I mentioned the project focuses on Copenhagen. We see this as a pilot. So the methods and approaches that we're developing in Copenhagen through the project, we expect to be able to adapt and replicate in other city contexts around the world, even though the content that we're doing here is Copenhagen specific and therefore will look different in different places. Briefly, to give you an overview of what the project is about before I dive into the main focus of today's presentation. The project is working on several different areas. We're working to establish science-based targets for a city's food system. So looking at the climate impact of an urban food system and seeing how to set an appropriate target that is in line with the Lancet recommendations and planetary boundaries and the Paris Agreement and other important commitments. We're working to reshape neighborhood level food environments through innovative urban planning and design approaches. And we're also working to build capacity in kitchens, specifically focusing on public kitchens in this project, to reshape their menus to better align with the Eat Lancet recommendations. So essentially becoming more plant forward. And we're also working through this project to engage other cities, other stakeholders to see how this work resonates and how it can be applied in a broader context. So now what I will dig into is the work that we're doing here on neighborhood food environments, because that's really where there's a strong citizen-driven innovation component. But first of all, I know the term food environment isn't something that everyone's familiar with, so I'll just take a quick step back and explain. The food environment is essentially where people interact with the food system. So it's the social, economic, physical setting where people buy food, eat food, sell food, and really engage with food in a kind of real life way. And in our project in Copenhagen, we are looking at the food environments in 2 different neighborhoods in the city. So to do this, we wanted to understand how the residents in these 2 neighborhoods really experience food when they're going about their daily lives. And one part of this study was conducted in 2019 by City University's Center for Food Policy. And this study was based on photo voice methodology. In the work here, 11 participants from one of the case study neighborhoods in Copenhagen were given cameras and basic photography training and instructed to go out into their community and document their food environment and their interaction with food over a span of 3 weeks. And within this work, every week the participants came back together to have a workshop, to go through some questions together, to explain what they had noticed about their food environments and really come up with criticisms, but also solutions. And the culmination of this was in a public workshop, a public photo exhibition. And then the findings also helped inform work that was done later on in the following year of the project. Just one second. So here's a slide that shows some of the pictures from the citizens that participated in this photo study. And we received tons and tons of information. It's a lot of really interesting visuals, but these are just a few that I'd like to highlight. So you can see that people had some thoughts on grocery stores and how healthy or unhealthy foods were promoted and displayed. Also the cost of healthy foods. People also had some feelings about food trucks and how food trucks could be more available outside of just the main tourist hubs, and how there could also be incentives to help food trucks provide healthy foods instead of normal junk food. And participants also had some thoughts on how to better use underutilized public spaces in the city. For example, setting up food markets or making it more appealing for people as part of the food environment. So the work in the photo study I mentioned helped inform kind of the further stage of the project. And in that further stage, project partners developed some prototypes focusing on the local food environment in these neighborhoods. So after conducting some research, in addition to the photo study, there was an idea to focus on targeting young people in these neighborhoods. And there were some sites selected that were close to schools, grocery stores, and underused kind of open public space. And over the summer or spring and summer of this year, project partners led by Gale, an urban planning and architecture firm, took part in a participatory and inclusive process to design these prototypes. So there were a number of different workshops with local youth in these neighborhoods where the youth could literally design their own food environment and public space. So you can see some of the pictures here where it was an engagement workshop with young people, very kind of tangibly putting pictures and sticky notes on and mapping out what they would like their space to look like. And this was a big foundation of what the prototypes ended up being. So the prototypes in these neighborhoods each included 3 components. There was pop-up furniture and gardens, so providing kind of an inviting public seating area. There were food trucks offering subsidized meals aligned with the Eat Lancet recommendations. And the local supermarkets also put special kind of Eat Lancet planetary health diet meals on offer. And the data that's been collected through these interventions is still being analyzed, but we're very much expecting it can shed light on what types of interventions shift people's behaviors in what way. So after listening to the local residents who took photos, after working directly with local youth, our hope is that these prototypes will actually provide some guidance on how to influence and invite people to make healthier and more sustainable food choices. So then tying it back to the FoodSHIFT project, there is a lab based in the Copenhagen region called the Kitchen of Tomorrow that's working through FoodSHIFT. And this Kitchen of Tomorrow lab has a lot of similarities with the Shifting Urban Diets project. There's a focus on developing models on climate-friendly food policies, using gastronomy to promote a sustainable plant-based regional food system, and also working with public kitchens to convert menus. So all of these areas, we can see really direct linkages with some of the other focus areas of the Shifting Urban Diets project. But what I think is a really interesting way going forward is combining this food environments approach. So taking the menus and the policies, but then also adding in the understanding of how everyday people interact with food in their own physical surroundings, and using these interventions to create a more holistic approach that really promotes healthy and sustainable food for everyone living in a city. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emily. Okay. Right, we're now on to the discussion portion of our webinar. I haven't had a chance to monitor the Q&A or the chat box. We'll get to that in a minute. I just want to kick things off, and this is really a question for Christine, for Maria, and Emily, of course. But what I was intrigued to discover as you were talking is the number and the range of different participants you have in these projects. And actually, when you start to consult your local community, you know, the idea and the hope is that you come across new actors to be involved in a radical change to a food system, which maybe you hadn't expected to be involved. And maybe starting with you, Christine, with your food hub. When you set that up, I imagine you had imagined who might be able to come along and who would take part, but were there new actors you hadn't thought would be there? And I think really this is also touching on the idea of, you know, making sure we have a diverse and wide range of stakeholders involved in kind of these, you know, all of these actions. So yeah, was there anyone there new who took you by surprise as a new food actor?
I think there are probably two answers to that. One is that generally for the Food Policy Council, I'm always surprised. But I think also Berlin is quite a challenging city for that because it's so big and it has so many different food initiatives and so many people interested in food. And I think there are a lot of food policy councils in smaller cities or in smaller areas in Germany or in other countries where actually that is a lot easier because it's easier to be in touch with most people who would be useful to be in touch with to change the food system. While in Berlin with 3.5 million people, it's really, that is a big challenge. And so yeah, I always learn about new initiatives, and I'm always surprised at new people coming up. For the food hubs themselves, I think that is difficult to answer because we've started this work, but part of the Berlin lab within the FoodSHIFT project is to actually now consolidate and set up a real pilot project and then learn from that and scale up. So we're actually not really in that phase that we can say. We are trying to be in touch with the neighborhood of that specific pilot project that we're setting up, which is in one district of Berlin. And I think that is it's a lot smaller in the sense that, yeah, you can look at a specific area and then see who are the stakeholders, who lives in the neighborhood, what community initiatives are there, what actors or what players do I need to be in touch with. And I'm sure we will still be surprised, but I think that's good. And I think in such a geographically confined context, it's easier to actually cover all many stakeholders, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you. Maria, I wonder if you might be able to just follow up on what Christine was saying. Did you come across new actors, new members of the community when you set up this community compost? You know, just really understanding who these citizens are, and if you came across people that you hadn't expected to be involved in the project.
Sorry, Stephanie, I can't hear you properly. It's like, can you repeat again, please?
Did you have any unusual actors from your local community getting involved in your project?
No, not unusual, not unusual. They were, it's a very small community. So they were involved from the public administration and they all collaborate together for the result. It was a very sensible community and okay. Not unusual actors.
No unusual, no, okay, that's fine, thank you. We had a question come in ahead of the webinar via email. I'm going to put this question to Emily. This question was, how can community gardens and small-scale urban agriculture make a real dent in changing the way we produce and consume food? So a question around community gardens and small-scale urban agriculture. Emily.
That's a great question. And I think there are a few different ways to look at it depending on kind of the geographic and cultural context. In most urban areas, community gardens and urban agriculture will not be enough to kind of really feed a significant percentage of the people living in a city or provide the bulk of their diets. But I think it can help for sure. It's also a great way to engage people more with food. So help people be more aware of seasonality, what's local, what's tasty, how does food grow, where does it come from, and therefore engage them in making more conscious food choices beyond what might be grown in a local garden. It's also been a great way, there are a lot of co-benefits that come from community garden and urban agriculture initiatives as well. So a sense of community, people can interact with each other. There are health benefits to being in fresh air. And in some parts of the world, for example, in Quezon City in the Philippines, there's a lot of initiatives promoting urban agriculture, especially in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, where food distribution channels were disrupted and kind of emergency food aid was more dry foods and canned foods. So there's a big push to get more people in the city, giving them access to urban gardens and opportunities to grow their own produce. So I think there are different co-benefits, and kind of the extent to which it can really make up a city's food consumption is a little bit dependent on geography.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I think you raise a really interesting point when you said it's not just really about the food. It's also about that touching base with other people, that fresh air, that getting out of the house and meeting other people in your community. I mean, that's just such an important element with these kind of new projects as well, is building those links locally. And I think, Christine, you touched on it with everything happening now over online, it really makes us miss those interactions, which are so important and which sometimes would get lost just continuing to go to the supermarket. Regine, I'm going to ask you, I haven't had a chance to look at the Q&A or the chat. Are there any questions there, Regine, that you would like to bring to this discussion from our audience?
There's much too many questions, actually. We would need like an hour more at least. I have one which came up several times. That was related to how do we make sure that it's like citizen driven, especially also the food hubs, but also the FoodSHIFT project in general. How do we address different social groups, how we make sure that not the usual suspects show up, but also others? That was often asked.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I sense it's really about accountability. I mean, who's there to make sure it continues to be citizen driven as well? That's a great question. I might ask Dirk, actually, based on what we've heard and everything, how do we make sure that these projects remain citizen driven?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, that's, the citizen philosophy is, of course, of a wide scope. And some of the questions we received is how do we avoid the usual suspect mechanism? So I see this as a specific, let's say, angle where FoodSHIFT needs to make a difference in this way, that we really reach people who are not normally thinking so much about healthy food, or that there might be a food system which needs to be changed. I think we do have a couple of innovation strategies in the pipeline. And I think here of the food procurement. I also think of the spatial dimension of linking farmers with urban people in terms of getting to know each other, but also of having much more direct exposure in the way that you know where your food comes from. But nevertheless, it's quite a challenge to get a wider scope of people interested who are not yet participating. And I think that that's really something where also this seminar, with the feedback we receive, I thought you just of Sarah, who, for example, questions whether we also include citizens who maybe have a drive of the system which is more traditional, maybe more meat-based, maybe more fast food, but still citizens which belong to the target group. And I think that is really something where we do have the time to think about and work and collaborate with the cities in these regions and city regions together.
I mean, that's an interesting point about diets, you know, or accepting different citizens with different diets or different diet wants and desires. Is that going to be something which is necessary when, you know, creating this citizen-driven innovation? Must it all prescribe to the same philosophy? Must it all lead to the same goal? What do you think about that, Christine? Do you think it's necessary that whilst we try and engage as many actors as possible, we share the same goal?
I think we need to engage as many people as possible, and we need we have the ambition to represent and talk and know the wishes and needs of all people in Berlin. I know that's a big ambition, but I think the goals and the vision we have now formulated, they have been formulated by a certain bubble of people, and we know that that is the case. And I think we definitely have to listen to people who have a completely different, needs, and we need to listen to that and find out how we can make that work in a sustainable food system. But I think we cannot just sit on our vision that we developed without many of the people that we need to take along and stay there. I think we need to be open and discuss if people are relying on fast food or on discounters and on cheap food. There is a problem and we need to deal with that, but it's not, we cannot deal with that by just ignoring it, and it won't go away by just telling people that they should just be more aware and just buy better food, because that's not going to work. I think we need to listen and develop solutions together that also also address policymakers, that they need to create frameworks that enable all people to be part of the food policy discussions and the food system in itself, because yeah, I mean, it's not just enough to place the responsibility on citizens. On consumers, rather. It is the responsibility should be on citizens, not on consumers, to buy better food.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. I wish we could go on, and Regina, as you said, there's loads of questions, but sadly, time has come up. Very quickly, in less than 30 seconds, Dirk, could you tell me what next for FoodSHIFT? I mean, are there any takeaways here for FoodSHIFT moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. Well, you know, I just would like to recapture what just been said before. I think the scope of our ambition has become quite apparent, and that we need to do something with this. I also saw questions regarding the role of business in companies, which is something we clearly have discussed, and where we see avenues for, let's say, larger impact, because companies are interested in selling their products to a wide range of people, and the whole food system as it stands is largely company driven. So at the moment where we get crucial companies and retailers and the food chain with all their, let's say, segments involved, the chance is big that we also reach more people, simply because of selling the food to a wider range of people will be an asset for these participants. So I think in terms of impact, we should not be too concerned to be, as it was framed, captured by food companies, that we play the game of the companies, but that we see that the transition which is ahead is something where we can all collaborate and should collaborate in. So that's something which we can do, and of course we need to share the information which is out there in a much more effective way, because if it's just only in this 1 hour, I'm sure there is really a lot of information which the usual suspect is maybe familiar with, but many people out there are not. And I'd say in terms of reaching out to people, we need to find ways of communicating these really interesting and exciting news in a way that people also feel intrigued to follow up and to get involved. So that's something where I think we really have quite some work to do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you for that, Dirk, and thank you to all of our speakers today. You've been fantastic. It's been really great to hear of these amazing initiatives happening all around Europe, but we know there's also amazing stuff happening all around the world. Thank you to all of our audience members for joining us today. Please stay in touch. We'd love to hear about your projects as well. These webinars are an opportunity to share experience in a safe and open way. And, you know, as we all together try and change the system, the food system as we know it. I think in the chat Regine's put the link to our newsletter sign up. So if you want to find out about future webinars or just general FoodSHIFT news, do sign up, or you can follow us online on social media. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, and thank you to EAT for having us as part of your Eat at Home event.